Before the first light stirs the sky, the forge is already breathing that it is not alive, and yet, it lives, tucked within a stone hut kissed by frost, half buried in silence. The coals beneath the ash glow like the last heartbeat of a dying star, waiting to be stirred, waiting to burn again. And it is he, the blacksmith, who answers. Always he answers. His fingers, thick and cracked like riverbed clay, pull the rope of the bellows in a slow rhythm. The fire hisses, then sighs, then roars. Sparks rise like fireflies escaping from a grave. The scent of smoke fills his lungs, familiar as blood. His shoulders creak as he lifts the first bar of iron. It is cold, lifeless. But not for long. A rooster cries in the dark. Somewhere beyond the trees, another day is being born, but in the forge, time does not pass. It repeats. The anvil waits like an altar. It has experienced thousands of blows, each one shaping something, binding something, breaking something. His hammer rests nearby, dull with use, its wooden handle blackened by years of sweat. He grips it like a prayer, not for peace, but for routine, for survival. The first strike echoes through the still morning, loud, deep, final. And with that sound, the world begins again. Outside, the village yawns into life. A dog barks. A door creaks. Children with dirty feet run through wet land, chasing geese too stubborn to fly. A baker tosses rye into his fire, and the smell rides the wind. But here, inside these walls, it is only steel and sweat. The blacksmith works without a word. His breath clouds the air. His muscles know what to do before his thoughts arrive. Iron softens in the heat, turns red like fresh wounds. He bends it, molds it, strikes it again, and in the shadows, his son watches. Point 13, perhaps. Or 14. Too young to carry a hammer, too old to run from the life laid before him. His arms are thin, his eyes unsure. He stands still, hands folded, shoulders drawn. Not from respect, but from fear. The hammer strikes again. The boy flinches. Just slightly. That he has seen his father do this 1,000 times. Watched from the corner. Learned without being taught. Because here in this house, words are few. Fire teaches. Pain teaches. Duty teaches. The father never says, "This is your future." He doesn't have to. The boy knows that he knows that the forge will not die with his father. It will call him. It will need him. Just as it needed the man before him, and the man before that. It is not inheritance. It is an inheritance dressed as iron. A chain disguised as a legacy. The boy wants more. But he says nothing. The father once dreamed of parchment, of learning to write, of leaving the village and becoming something soft. But soft things do not survive winters like these. And so he stayed, hammered, married, raised a child. And now he passes the fire forward. Neither father nor son speak of dreams. There is no room for dreams when the fire eats wood so quickly, when orders from the baron come sealed in wax, when every horseshoe is the difference between coin or hungered. He wipes sweat from his brow with the edge of his sleeve, the same sleeve that wiped the brow of his own father, years ago, when he stood in this same spot. The cycle is older than memory. Iron rods lean against the wall, some for hinges, some for locks. Others will be made into tools for the Lord's men. Then some will become swords. He doesn't ask who they are for. He doesn't care. His job is not to question. It is to shape. But today, the metal sings differently. Each strike echoes with a strange weight. The flames rise a little higher. The coals hiss a little louder. The boy shifts in the corner, stepping back slightly as a spark flares and lands near his foot. The blacksmith does not look up. He remembers, dimly, the first time his own father let him strike the iron. His hands had trembled. His palms had blistered. But he had not cried. Crying was not allowed near fire. The boy will learn that too, but not today. The bird outside, a raven perhaps, pecks at something in the dirt. The bone. Forgotten. And the boy watches it with a strange focus, as if it means something. As if the bird knows more than they do. He does not yet know what the forge will take from him. He does not yet know what it already has. The blacksmith places the finished piece, a door hinge, onto a wooden shelf. It will cool there, then be packed, then delivered. He picks up the next bar. Hot, heavy, half-shaped. He raises the hammer again, and the cycle begins once more. But what if one day, this forge becomes more than wood and fire? What if it becomes the place where betrayal is born, where rebellion is crafted, stroke by stroke, behind silent walls? What if this boy, this quiet boy with soft hands and hard eyes, grows to forge something his father could never imagine? A key that opens the gates to the castle. A blade that ends a war. A weapon that changes a kingdom. What if the hammer, so ordinary in the hands of the father, becomes deadly in the hands of the son? The forge does not know the future, it only burns, but beneath its warmth, destinies are melted and reshaped. And somewhere inside, the boy clenches his jaw, watching the flame, and wondering what it feels like to hold the hammer instead of fearing it. Smoke curls upward like an old hymn that it dances toward the rafters, slow and aching, as if it carries prayers meant for no God at all, only the memory of one. Beneath that smoke, the hammer falls again. And again. And again. Each strike is a sentence. Each ring, a confession. Stone walls catch the sound and throw it back, muffled by soot and years of blackened breath. The forge is not loud. It is haunted. The man who moves within it, Garrick, is quiet too. He does not grunt or curse or sing like other smiths. His mouth stays set, his jaw clenched as if holding back a storm. His sweat is not born from fire. It is born from a restlessness he cannot name. One that wakes him before dawn and won't let him sleep when night falls. It lives behind his ribs, crawling, shifting, pulsing, like something alive inside him that cannot die, that he has long forgotten the year he stopped being young, that he shapes iron not for joy, not even for duty, but because he cannot stop. His hands know no other life. The rhythm of the hammer is his only anchor. The scent of scorched leather, hot oil, and blooded steel is the air he breathes. Without the forge, Garrick might disappear altogether. They say he was a soldier once. But they only say it when he's out of earshot, and even then, they whisper it. Not from fear, but respect. Or maybe pity. Because no one who returns from war completely returns. Garrick never speaks of those years. He never names the battles. Never tell the stories. But sometimes, when thunder rolls across the moors, his shoulders flinch, not from the sky, but from memory. And when a child cries too sharp, his eyes close too long. The pain of the past slips through him like a blade drawn slowly through flesh. Now, he is the village's smith. That is all they need to know, that he mends what breaks, oxen shoes, barrel hoops, gate hinges. But he also mends what cannot be named. A snapped rosary. A rusted brooch once worn by a dead wife. The broken latch on the priest's chest that holds not gold but guilt. Garrick does not ask why. He fixes it. Then he returns to the fire, but beneath the forge, beneath the hot stones and ash, there is a drawer no one touches. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, lies something that does not belong to this simple life. A blade too fine for harvesting. Its edge is flawless. Its hilt, worn only where fingers once gripped it too tightly. Carved into its spine is a crest almost erased by time. A serpent around a tree. The sword has not tasted blood in years. But Garrick polishes it every fortnight. Not for readiness. For reverence. Or guilt that he does it when the boy isn't watching. Auric. The apprentice. 14 winters and full of questions that he works beside Garrick now, fumbling with tongs too heavy for his grip. He mimics the man's movements, the steady twist of the wrist, the sudden cooling plunge into water, but not his silence. The boy is full of voice, full of wonder, full of fire not yet tamed. Master, is it true swords scream when they break? Do souls burn in the forge? Did you ever kill a man with your hands? Questions Garrick never answers, that he only hammers. The sound is louder than the truth. Louder than grief, but Auric keeps asking. His curiosity is not foolish. It is hunger. A hunger for meaning. For history. For the stories that shaped the quiet man who now shapes iron. And somewhere, deep inside, Garrick fears the boy will find the answers on his own. The blade beneath the coals. The scars on Garrick's shoulder. The tattoo just above his heart, burned deep enough to outlive flame. A mark from a time when he fought not for coin or crown, but for something far more dangerous. Belief. Outside, snow begins to fall. It drifts gently over the thatched roofs, over the graves behind the chapel, over the fields where no crops grow in winter. The world goes white, but the forge stays burning. Inside, sweat drips from brow to iron. The hiss of water on steel echoes like breath sucked between teeth. Garrick looks at Alric. The boy's face is smudged with ash, but his eyes shine like polished glass. So full of life. So unaware of what life can take that he wonders if Alric will survive this world. Not just with body, but soul intact. The hammer falls again. A spark flies. And for a moment, Garrick sees not a boy beside him, but a shadow. A shadow of himself. Before the fire. Before the war that he turns away. The blade must not be seen. Not yet. For though the war is gone, the silence between strikes is growing louder. And sometimes, silence is not peace. It is a warning. What happens when the boy asks the question Garrick cannot ignore? What happens when the past, buried beneath ash and steel, begins to rise? Outside, the snow thickens. Inside, the heat burns hotter than ever, and beneath the forge, wrapped in cloth, the old sword waits for a hand to remember it that a drop of molten steel falls into brine. It screams like something alive. Steam rises, thick and sour, curling around the rafters of the forge like a serpent disturbed. Shadows dance against blackened walls. A rat darts between the slats of warped wood. No one flinches that in Bradencross. Pain does not startle. It lingers. It hums beneath the cobblestones and slips through the alleys with the stench of waste and rot. The gutters bleed. The bells of merchants ring not like songs, but like chains dragging behind footsteps. Bradencross is not a city. It is a scar. Behind a crumbling chapel wall, veiled in ivy and silence, the blacksmith's forge glows like a wound that never closes. Here, the world's cruelty takes shape in iron and one stops at Ellard's door. Not the beggars, not the priests, but the nobles. They know. This is the place where swords are born for judgment, where shackles are made not to hold, but to break. This is the forge where mercy dies. Allard stands over the anvil like a relic carved from soot and muscle. His beard is streaked with ash. His hands, those ruined, trembling hands, are maps of burn and scar. He does not wince when sparks kiss his skin. Pain has long since ceased to be an interruption. Now it is in rhythm. It is prayer. The blade in his grip gleams like silver under moonlight. A weapon so thin it could whisper through silk. He dips it into a vat thick with brine and boiled bone. The smell rises, feral, cloying, the scent of old death and older rituals. The scribe behind him does not speak. His eyes stay down. The parchment in his hands shakes, not from the cold. No one speaks in this place unless commanded. Allard finishes the sword in silence. The scribe steps forward. Another order, 12 manacles. 2 brands. Stamped with the crest of House Fenric, the double-headed wolf. Allard does not answer. But his mind pulls backward, far past the heat, past the iron, to a field choked in smoke and screams. He remembers that sigil, once flapping proudly over the men who came at dawn. Who set fire to his village, who dragged his father by the throat, who left his mother's voice echoing in his ears long after her throat had gone quiet that he remembers. But he says nothing, because this is the curse of survival, to serve the sons of those who murdered your name. Allard takes the molds from beneath the bench. Old, cracked, familiar. He pours the molten metal with slow precision. Each hiss is a memory. Each pop is a ghost released. His hands move without thought. Not because he feels nothing, but because he feels too much. It is safer not to pause. Pausing means remembering. Remembering means breaking. The forge is his penance that he stamps the brands, sharp and clean. The Fenric wolf snarls back at him in glowing red. He leaves them on the stone to cool, just inches from his feet. The scribe lays a pouch of coin on the table, but Allard does not look. Payment is not the point. Payment cannot undo blood. The boy leaves, but he leaves more than silver. That a scroll remains. Sealed with wax. Allard notices it only after dusk, when the forge dims and the smoke settles. He holds it in his hands for a long time, staring at the seal as if it might speak. As if it might not be opened. He breaks it anyway. Inside are diagrams. Precise. Cold. Without hesitation. It is not a gallows. Not a rack. Not a cage. It is a machine. Of endings. No ropes. Only levers. Blades. A seat too narrow for comfort, but wide enough for fear. A design meant not just to kill, but to teach obedience through spectacle. The kind of thing nobles whisper about. A device that can erase rebellion with the sound of metal on bone. Ellard reads it once. Then again. He memorizes every line, not out of duty, but because he knows he cannot let it fall into another's hands. Then, without pause, he feeds the scroll to the coals. The fire eats it without question, but the image remains. Branded now into his thoughts like all the others. He will build it. From memory, because that is what the dead do. They live through our hands. They guide our fingers when the heart forgets how to resist. They whisper through hammers, through blueprints, through every cursed nail driven into wood. He should have died with his family. But death chose someone else that day. And what lived on was not a man, but a function that by candlelight. Ellard sits alone in the forge. Outside, the city begins to sleep. Inside, the warmth of the fire does not reach the corners. The rats are back. The silence returns. He sharpens his tools. One by one. Not for tomorrow's commissions. For the task only he now knows. To build what must never be built. Because if he doesn't, someone else will. Someone who won't remember the screams. A single coal pops and he looks up. The blade from earlier, gleaming still, untouched by ash, catches the light and throws it across the stone wall. A double shadow appears behind him. It looks like a man. And something else. He closes his eyes. Tomorrow he begins. But tonight, he listens. To the ghosts. To the iron. To the silence before the forge comes alive again. And outside, just beyond the chapel wall, a hooded figure watches. Waiting. Not for the machine, but for the man who builds it. The past has found him again. And it wears the crest of a wolf. The wind crawled through the broken window like a thief, slow and cold, dragging with it the smell of wet earth and smoke. Inside the forge, fire pulsed like a wounded heart, flaring, fading, flaring again. Every breath in that place tasted of metal and sorrow. The rain, still falling after 3 endless days, tapped out a rhythm on the roof like a dying prayer. And beneath that rhythm stood Maeve. Her shadow stretched long across the stone floor, flickering with every burst from the coals. Her face, streaked with soot and grief, bore the weight of a name unspoken since her father's death. The villagers whispered about her, said she'd gone mad with mourning, said a girl had no place by the flame. But none dared stop her. The fire knew her. The forge obeyed. She moved with the memory of hands that once guided hers. Not perfectly, not yet, but with hunger. Her fingers, wrapped in blood-stained cloth, gripped the tongs like a lifeline. The hammer in her hand was too large, too heavy, but she wielded it with fury. Sparks burst beneath each blow, tiny stars screaming into the dark, vanishing before their time. Above her, the royal scroll fluttered in the draft, its wax seal broken but its command untouched. 30 arrowheads. For the Baron. For his soldiers. For a war that crept closer with every dawn. Maeve did not think of the Baron. She thought of the silence in their house now. The way her father's boots still sat by the door, filled with dust. The way the village boys lowered their eyes when they passed her. The way her brother never came back from the north. She shaped the first arrowhead slowly, letting the steel glow a fierce orange before plunging it into the brine. The hiss was sharp, sudden, like a snake striking. She did not flinch, each arrowhead came quicker. Her body remembered the rhythm, even if her soul still staggered. Her mother's lullaby echoed faintly in her mind, sweet, soft, out of place. And then, sharper, her father's voice from years ago, strike true, or don't strike at all. The forge felt smaller now. Or perhaps the weight she carried had grown too wide for walls that in the corner. A single candle flickered beside a carved wooden box. Inside it her father's tools, oiled, wrapped, waiting. She hadn't touched them. Not yet. They felt like relics, like bones of a life she could no longer summon. But tonight, something was different. Tonight, the forge breathed deeper. The fire didn't just warm, it watched as the final arrowhead cooled. Maeve placed it gently beside the others. 29, gleaming like death on a bench of Oakd the 30th, she did not sit with them. She held it longer, ran her thumb along its edge. A single drop of blood welled from the skin, bright against the dull gray. She didn't wipe it away, she turned toward the fire. Her face, once soft, had hardened. Not with age, but with purpose. This arrow was not for war, it was for justice, it was for the man who rode in under the Baron's crest 2 winters past, laughing as her father was pulled from the hearth, accused without trial. She remembered his voice. His boots. The way his blade was clean even after it fell. They said the rebellion was chaos, that the Baron kept them safe. But Maeve knew now, peace had always been paid for in silence. And she would no longer be silent. A rumble of thunder rolled across the sky as she wrapped the final arrowhead in cloth and placed it inside her satchel. Her hands trembled, but her steps did not. Outside, the rain began to ease, thinning into mist. A dog barked far off. The wind carried whispers from the woods beyond the village, distant, broken, like forgotten songs. Maeve stepped from the forge, her cloak soaked before her second breath. But she did not stop. She passed the chapel, the well, the house she no longer entered. Each place is marked by memory, by loss, by fire. Behind her, the forge crackled softly, the coals still glowing, the hammer resting by the anvil. A girl had made weapons. Tomorrow, a shadow would fall across the Baron's court, and someone would bleed. The bell tolled once, deep and distant, its voice swallowed quickly by the ivy that wrapped the tower like a noose. Fog drifted through the cloister like a ghost unsure of where it died. And beneath it all, far below the cracked mosaics and fading saints, Brother Osric lit the forge. The flame came alive slowly, licking the cold air with trembling fingers. It did not roar like the forges of armies, nor shine with glory. It murmured, like confession. The coals whispered old names. Names Osric could not forget. His hands, thick with scars and prayer, moved without needing light. By day, he copied scripture in precise strokes, the words of salvation penned with trembling ink. But here, at night, he returned to the fire, not for salvation, but because it would not let him go. That he said little. Even in his prayers, silence clung to him. He was not born for silence. Once, he had shouted commands across blood-soaked fields. His voice had broken men. Now it broke bread. But the weight remained. The forge knew the weight. Iron hissed as it kissed the coals. Sparks fluttered and died before they could escape. He struck the horseshoe gently, shaping it into a gate latch. Each blow echoed through the stone arches like a slow heartbeat, steady and sorrowful. He wiped sweat from his brow with a sleeve already soaked, then reached for the wooden cross that hung beside the bellows. His fingers pressed it briefly, not seeking comfort, just remembering. Behind him, soft footsteps that he didn't turn. He had heard them before they touched the floor, young, careful, not yet weighed down by guilt. A novice, barely of age, eyes wide with hunger for understanding. Osric knew the type. He had been that boy once too, before the battlefield at Dunslow, before the smoke, before the screaming horses, before a child died in his arms, clutching his tunic and begging for a mother Osric would never find. The boy said nothing, just watched. Then slowly he pointed, not at the cross, not at the tools for chapel or grave, but at the shackles, rough iron, cold, cruel shapes that Osric had hoped no one would see. He hadn't made them for monks, nor for lords. He had made them because the past asked for them, because punishment felt easier than forgiveness. They're for sinners, Osric muttered. The boy didn't speak. But his gaze remained, sharp, unyielding, like the steel Osric once wore across his chest. For a moment, something cracked behind Osric's eyes. A storm, long dormant. He saw again the fires of Dunslow, heard the desperate breath of the dying, remembered the chainmail cutting into his skin as he dragged a comrade's body from the mud, only to bury it in silence, nameless and forgotten. That he turned back to the forge. The shackles were ready. The iron was cool now, shaped, certain that he lifted them in both hands. They were heavier than they looked, as if they carried the weight of every wrist they might touch. That night, long after the boy had returned to his straw bed, Osric walked alone through the cloister garden, under the pale moon and the broken gaze of saints whose eyes had been worn away by time. He knelt behind the chapel, where roots grew deep and no one asked questions. With trembling hands he dug, not deep, just enough. Then he wrapped the shackles in linen, soft, white, the same kind used to swaddle relics, and buried them in the dark soil. That he did not pray, he did not mark the spot, he simply rose, wiped the dirt from his knees, and returned to the forge. The fire still burned as it always did, but that night, he did not touch the cross. He stood in silence, watching the flames. They danced like memories, bright, dangerous, impossible to hold, and though his hands still ached for penance, Osric knew now he would make no more shackles. Not for abbots, not for kings, not for the ghosts that followed him, but the forge would remain, because sins, like steel, are not so easily melted, and some fires are not meant to be extinguished, only contained. For now that a single cry pierced the silence, sharp, hollow, ancient, that a raven, black as scorched bone, circled once above the hills, then descended like a shadow loosed from the sky. Its wings sliced through the smoke rising from a lonely forge hidden deep in the foothills beyond the city of Ironholt. There was no village here, no lights, no road, only wild earth and wind, and the pulse of fire from beneath the ground. The forge throbbed red against the dark, like a heart that would not stop beating. Eleonora stood within, sleeves rolled to her elbows, arms braided with soot and muscle. Her breath came slow and deep. She did not blink as sparks danced before her eyes. The flames kissed her cheeks without fear. The anvil before her was blackened from decades of hammerfall, but it still held the echo of steel like a memory that refuses to fade. She was alone. She had always been alone. That an old man warmed her bed. No child called her mother. No priest dared ask why. She arrived in the valley during the winter of famine, when the ground cracked with frost and even wolves stopped howling. She came with a broken cart, a trunk of strange tools, and a silence stitched tight into her cloak. The villagers who saw her pass crossed themselves but said nothing. A woman alone was dangerous. A woman alone with fire was something worse. Now they called her the Widow of Iron. Not because she mourned her husband, but because everything she touched seemed to carry grief. Her blades were said to sing when they cut. Her armor fit like prophecy. Nobles sent riders in secret, scrolls sealed with wax and gold, never bearing names. She did not ask. She did not care. She only read the measurements. Then I worked. Tonight, her hands were shaped like a short sword. The blade was wide and fast, built not for ceremony but survival. She carved a single flower into the hilt, a bloom caught mid-wilt, its petals soft and ruined. There was no crest, no signature, just the language of the forge, whispered through every notch and edge. She sang as she worked. A lullaby with no known origin. Just wind and syllables and sorrow. Her voice was low, almost lost in the roar of the coals, but each word trembled with something older than pain. When she raised her hammer for the final strike, her fingers paused. That I was trembling. The steel did not. She struck once, clean, and then, the raven that landed just outside the stone arch, its feet sinking slightly into the ash-blown mud. It did not move, did not blink, just stared. Eleonora looked back at it, eyes narrowed, sweat glistening like oil across her brow. Then she turned, slowly, to her bench. There, among scraps of iron and melted wax, lay a ring, gold, slim, elegant, twisted with vine and thorn. Familiar that it was the ring she had cast into the flames 3 winters ago. The same ring she had worn on her smallest finger. The one she took from the hand of a dying knight, a man who called her name in his last breath, though she had long forgotten him. She had given it to the fire, but the fire had not let it go. Her breath caught in her chest like a snare. She did not touch it. Instead, she sat down on the stone beside her forge, hands resting on her knees, the sword still cooling on the anvil behind her. Smoke curled around her shoulders like a shawl. For a moment, nothing moved. Not the wind. Not the raven. Not even the flame. She stared into the coals, and remembered. She remembered the screams of Ironholt when the plague came. The way the city gates groaned shut and never opened again. She remembered faces blistered with sickness, and soldiers burning bodies faster than they could bury them. She remembered fire. So much fire. And the ring, taken from a hand that once pulled her from ruin. She had buried her past in molten iron, but iron, like grief, has memory. Her forge had always kept its secrets. Buried deep in a charcoal pit passed down through blood and whisper. But some secrets rise. Some memories wait until the fire is low and the wind is just right. She stood again. The ring remained. She picked it up, slowly, reverently. It was warm, but not hot. As if it had only just left the flames. She held it to the light. The raven called out again. This time, closer. She turned to the sword on the anvil. A gift for a woman of high birth. A blade meant to end something. Or begin it. With care, Eleonora slipped the ring onto the hilt, above the carved flower. It fits perfectly. She did not ask what it meant. Some messages are not meant to be read. Only carried. Outside, the wind shifted, and in the far distance, beyond forest and fog, the bells of Ironholt rang once. Not for morning, but a warning. Eleonora looked to the east. The sky there was strange, a red smudge on the horizon as if another forge had awakened. The wind had changed. It no longer whispered through the dead hedgerows like it used to, no longer carried the scent of barley or smoke from morning fires. Now it dragged the bitter perfume of rust, frozen soil, and peat smoke through the ruins of what once was a village. Near its edge, half swallowed by bramble and years, stood the last forge. Its stones were blackened with time. Moss clawed at the corners. And above the door, the iron sign bearing the name, Thorn, hung crooked, creaking softly in the breeze, as though even metal could mourn. Inside, the fire stirred, dim at first, uncertain. Then a breath of life from the bellows made it flare. Not bright, not young, but steady. Old Thorn stood before it, bent like the oaks outside, fingers wrapped in lambskin, joints aching with every shift of weight. His breath rattled in his chest. His eyes, once sharp as tongs, were now filmed with age. But tonight, they burned with something deeper than sight. The forge hadn't been lit in years. Not since the last order. Not since the roads stopped filling with soldiers. Not since the grave beside the rosebush was covered over. But tonight. Tonight was different. On the table beside him, beside a cracked mug and a few old nails, lay a letter. Shaking in its script. The seal is broken. It bore a name Thorn hadn't spoken aloud in 2 decades. Kalin, his son. The boy who once hammered beside him, fingers black with soot, eyes full of questions. The boy who left with a shout, a slammed door, and a vow never to return. Never to be a blacksmith. Never to be his father's son. Where he went, Thorn never knew. The priesthood? The battlefield? Some whispered he'd joined the thieves who raided the coastal holds. Others said he'd died in the plague. But Thorn had waited without saying he was waiting, and now the letter said he was coming home, not with an apology. Not with reason. Just coming. The old man moved slowly, each motion a ceremony. He selected a single bar of steel, untouched by rust, saved without knowing why. He placed it on the anvil. The heat from the coals licked his face, and for a moment he was young again. The roar of the fire echoed with the memory of orders being shouted, tools clattering, horses waiting outside with armor in need of mending. But there were no horses now. No shouting. Just the rasp of his breath and the steady rise and fall of the bellows. He raised his hammer. The sound, once thunder, now rang like a heartbeat in a tomb. Slow. Final. Outside, the snow began to fall. Silent. Relentless. Covering the footprints of what little life remained in the village. A few chickens. A goat. And somewhere, the bark of a dog, distant, cautious. Inside, Thorn worked. Not with the speed of youth, but with the precision of memory. His mind wandered that he saw again the wooden soldiers he used to carve for Kalin, back when the boy believed battles were games. He remembered the spring light on his wife's face when she brought in honey cakes, her laughter louder than the forge. That he remembered the last argument. The slam of the door. The long years of silence. Still he hammered. The steel bent, took shape. A key. not a sword, not armor, not even a lock to match it, just a key, simple, unmarked, shaped with patience, not purpose that he wrapped it in cloth and placed it on the hearth, not on a shelf, not in a box, right there in the firelight, as if it might glow, as if it might mean something. A key to nothing in particular, and yet, a key always suggests a door that he didn't write back. Didn't say the forge would be warm or that the hearth would be lit. He left no note that he only made the key, not for forgiveness. That was too much to ask of time, not even for reconciliation. That was a word for kings and poets, but for possibility. Outside, the snow thickened, softening the world into silence. Inside, the shadows stretched long across the floor, one shaped like an anvil, another like a man holding a hammer. They flickered, wavered, then settled as the fire settled. Thorn sat down on his old stool. The same one he built in the first year of marriage. The one that creaked louder than the dog outside. He placed his hands on his knees. Felt the warmth of the forge on his face. He did not smile, but his eyes stayed open, watching, listening, waiting, and somewhere beyond the woods, far down a road buried in snow and regret, footsteps began to form. Lightning carved across the sky like a broken oath. The sea screamed below, hammering the cliff face with fists of water, as if it meant to swallow care vein whole. The old fortress stood its ground, black stone against blacker sky, its towers bleeding rain and silence. Inside its walls, the storm could be heard like a warning whispered too late, but in the depths, below the great hall, past the sealed doors and the rows of rusting spears, there was another fire burning. A forge, small and stubborn, hissing against the cold, and beside it, a man named Bram. He worked in shadows, hunched over steel, his face damp with sweat and sea salt, his fingers cracked from heat and time. His world was flame and iron, oil and silence. No chants, no music, just breath and metal. He didn't make swords for kings or helmets for heroes. His trade had become stranger. Armor for ghosts, that's what the guards called them, the royal tomb detail. They arrived at dusk, never speaking. Their cloaks soaked from the shore, their footsteps muffled by the veils they wore instead of helms. Always veils. No faces. No names. They were the watchers of the dead, a dozen figures who kept vigil over the crypts beneath Care Vein, where the old kings slept and the older sins festered. Bram was their blacksmith, not by choice, but by oath. And coins. And something quieter, duty, perhaps. Or guilt. Their breastplates bore spirals etched deep into the steel, ancient symbols whispered to ward off demons. Their gauntlets, padded with crushed lavender, not for comfort, but to mask the stench of the tombs. They never asked for blades. Only silence. Only the tools to bear their burden without a sound. That he spoke to no one. And they never replied. Until the night the storm came. It was late. The fire was low. A gauntlet slipped from Bram's grip, worn fingers too tired, too slow. It hit the stone with a clang sharp enough to slice the silence in two. One of the veiled guards stepped forward. She didn't raise a hand. Didn't point. She knelt, slowly, as if the sound had hurt her. The veil shifted in the wind from the forge, then, softly, a voice. "You know my name." Bram stopped breathing. It was not a question. Not a threat. It was a memory, and suddenly, the years fell away. That voice, it hadn't touched his ears in over a decade. But he had once known it better than his own. Isla. She had vanished during the famine, when fields cracked open like wounds and mothers buried their children with berry-stained hands. She was gone without a trace, a ribbon left behind on the elder tree near the edge of the village, and no one had seen her since. Yet here she stood, not alive. Not dead, something in between. He didn't speak. Couldn't. The words had rusted inside him long ago. She reached out, her gloved fingers brushed the anvil where he worked, then withdrew like smoke. Then she turned and walked back into the darkness, veil trailing behind her like mist on the sea. When she was gone, Bram stood there for a long time, hearing a drum against his ribs. He did not call after her. He did not ask how or why or what bargain had been made. Instead, he looked down, and there, beside the coals, lay a ribbon, blue, frayed, knotted with a thread only he would know, the same he tied in her hair when they were children, when the world was gentler, before war, before hunger, he picked it up with hands that had shaped thousands of weapons, but never once touched something so light without it breaking that he said nothing. But that night, he did something he hadn't done in years. He forged a blade. Not for the tomb, not for kings, but a small blade. Swift, silent. No ornament, no crest. Just steel, sharpened with care. And when it was finished, he did not hide it, that he placed it in the corner of the armory, not on a rack, not in a chest. Just there, beneath a lantern that flickered when the wind sighed through the stones, in case she ever needed it. He didn't know what she was now, soldier, shadow, memory. But he knew she had returned to a place that devoured the living and buried the rest. And something in him, something quiet, stubborn, and human, needed her to have a choice. Outside, the storm screamed louder. The fortress groaned against the wind. Inside, the forge hissed on. Bram sat back, watching the blade gleam once in the firelight, then disappear into the dark, and far below, in the royal crypts, something shifted. Not loudly, not violently, just moved, like the dead weren't sleeping quite as deeply as they should. A goose cried out in the square, not from pain, but from heat. Its flesh blistered above a spit, juices hissing into the fire, as children laughed and clanged stolen pans together. Fernlow was alive with color that day. Banners of red and gold danced between windows. Soot-blackened bells rang from the chapel steeple. Bread rose in every oven, thick with caraway and prayer. But beneath the festival's painted joy, there was a tremble in the earth, not from footsteps. From fear. The tax collector was coming, and no one said his name. No one dared. His shadow was heavier than any crown. He did not bleed like men, they whispered. He counted not coins, but failures. And Fernlow, for all its cheer and roasted meats, was behind the grain. Behind on iron. Behind on debt. So they celebrated louder, as if noise could muffle dread. As if painted flags could shield them from the blade of punishment. And in the forge behind the chapel, far from laughter, a boy worked like a man who knew what happened to villages that could not pay. Diran. 16. Hands too small for the hammer. Eyes too tired for his age. His master, gone a week now. Fever, they said. Or grief. Or both. The man had simply stopped waking. Now the forge was Diran's. Not by choice. By necessity. The orders had been left behind, scrawled in red on soot-drenched parchment, for wagon wheels. 3 door latches. 1 ceremonial sword for the bailiff, and 5 days. Diran had never made a sword. He had barely made nails. His palms blistered before noon. His fingers bled before dusk. By the second night he wrapped his hands in cloth soaked with vinegar to numb the sting. He chewed crusts of old rye bread between strikes, spitting out the blood when he bit too hard. The forge laughed at him, the iron buckling, twisting, resisting him at every turn, but he could not stop. His mother's roof leaked. His sister coughed blood in her sleep. There was no coin left. Only fire. Out on the third night, when even the stars refused to shine, a figure stepped through the smoke, an old woman, cloaked in gray. Face hidden. But her eyes were silver, not bright, but old, like tarnished mirrors that had seen too much and remembered everything. She did not greet him. She did not ask permission. I need a blade, she said, voice dry as parchment. Diran stared, chest heaving, skin pale from the heat. I've no time, he whispered. She tilted her head. It's not for war. It's for silence. For a ritual that comes before dawn. He didn't understand. It must sing, she added, softer now. Shape it with that in mind. Then she stepped back, disappearing beyond the smoke without waiting for an answer. He stood there alone, heart thudding like a hammer. It must sing. That he could have ignored her. Could have told himself it was a dream, the kind that comes when men haven't slept in days. But something in the forge had shifted. He began again. This time, the blade curved, not by accident, but by intention. Thinner. Longer. Lighter than the ceremonial sword on the list. Not for battle. Not for show. For something else. It felt wrong in his hands, but it also felt right. When she returned, the forge was dim. His skin was blistered raw. But the blade lay waiting, cool now, wrapped in linen, humming faintly like wind between stones. She did not speak. only placed a single feather on the table, black a crow's feather, and then she was gone. No footstep, no sound, only mist curling behind her, as if the forge had exhaled. The next morning, the village awoke to chaos. The bailiff's cart had broken, an axle shattered on the road before it even reached the gates. The feast delayed. The tax collector halted, and beneath the forge floor, while sweeping ash, Diran found something buried where no coin had ever been dropped. A coin, older than the kingdom, older than its borders or laws, etched with a serpent swallowing its own tail, and no one could tell him what it meant. Not the priest, not the elders. No one even recognized the metal, but when he held it, the forge seemed warmer, quieter, as if it had been waiting for him. He said nothing, told no one of the feathers, or the blade, or the woman, but he kept the coin, and every now and then, when the night was particularly dark and the embers were low, he would stare into the fire and wonder what he had made, and for whom. The forge gave no answers, only fired at a storm had passed, but the sky still held its breath. Wind whispered through reeds in the marshlands, dragging a cold mist across dead grass and black water. Somewhere, a crane lifted its long neck, sensing something not of nature, but of memory. At the edge of the mire stood a house once noble, now broken at the bones. Ivy wrapped its stone like old fingers. Roof tiles hung loose. Windows were veiled with dust. And yet, from the heart of that ruin, came heat. The forge had been cold for 20 years, but tonight, it breathed. Smoke curled from the chimney like a resurrection. Not wild, not rushed, slow, controlled, like something sacred. Inside, where time had rotted the furniture and silence had made its home, one figure stood lit by flame. Lady Rowan, no longer a girl. Not quite what the world called a woman either. Her sleeves rolled past the elbow. Her hair tied back with a red ribbon, the same her mother had once worn. Her eyes were not tired. They were sharp, made of flint. The anvil had not forgotten her. Nor had the tools, each lined on the table like old ghosts waiting to be held. This forge had once belonged to her mother, but her mother had not made blades. She was beautiful. The queen's favorite goblet was born here. Silver twisted like ivy, leaves cradling the rim. The great chandelier in the high chapel of Lycia, with 700 stars cast in glass and silver, was shaped in these very walls. But Rowan had not come for stars, or goblets, or praise. She had come for vengeance. The house had fallen not by war, but by whisper, stripped of its name by ink and seal. The steward who ruled now had once been her tutor. He had taught her Latin, recited poetry in winter, and then, with a stroke of a quill, sent her brothers to the front lines. None returned, and the steward, that smiling shadow, kept their lands, their horses, even the rings from their dead fingers. Rowan remembered everything. She said no words. The forge needed none. She fed the fire with lavender, dried and brittle. Its scent masked the copper bite of melting silver. She tore pages from an old ledger, the steward's own handwriting, and fed them too. Names burned. Some's vanished in flame. The ash curled in script as it rose. She brought forth the pieces one by one, that a candlestick, polished smooth by generations of hands. A brooch shaped like a lily. A crown once gifted by a knight who had danced with her mother in spring, all melted, not destroyed. Reborn. The mold she chose was her mother's, used once to shape the handle of a ceremonial letter opener for the royal courts. It curved like the crescent moon. Into it, Rowan poured the molten mix, a shimmering blend of legacy and rage. She did not blink, she did not cry. The dagger took form slowly, as if reluctant to be born. When it cooled, she pressed into the hilt a single drop of garnet. Dark red, like dried blood beneath frost. No crest. No initials. Only silence. At dawn, she quenched the blade in wine, the last bottle left from the wedding of her eldest brother. He had worn white that day. She remembered the way he laughed, unaware of how little time remained. Now, his laughter lived in the steel. Later that day, a servant in the steward's house would enter the study to light the lamps, and find a sealed package upon the desk, wrapped in cloth. Still warm to the touch, inside, the dagger. No note. No demand, only a weapon born of grief and memory. and fire, and though the steward would never speak of what he found, he would never sleep soundly again. In the marshlands, the forge dimmed once more, but somewhere deep beneath the stone floor, something remained awake.